Right, so it's happened. We got the junk bond status. What exactly does it mean? We've been waiting for this for a few years, wondering about it. Essentially, it means that the so-called credit rating agencies are expressing their very grave concern about the ability and/or the willingness of the government to meet its commitments on debt it has incurred over the last number of years. So by downgrading our government bonds to so-called junk bond status, they're essentially suggesting to potential buyers to think very carefully before buying our bonds. Now, this has all kinds of implications. One is that from now onwards, if government wishes to borrow more money by issuing more bonds, they would have to really raise the ante. In other words, they'd have to offer a very good return to make it worthwhile, given the fact that there's some skepticism about the quality of these bonds. What that really means is we have to pay even more interest on money borrowed. That means in the years and even the decades that lie ahead, the government will have to budget for the interest payments, already absorbing up to 12% of the total budget. That'll be even higher, which means in very practical sense of the word, that for every 100 rands worth of tax that you and I are paying, at least 12 rand and perhaps even more will have to go towards financing the interest on these bonds. Put differently, for every 1 rand put aside for interest, there's 1 rand not available for spending by government on infrastructure, electricity, housing, education, and the like. Chances are that along with a rising cost of long-term credit, we could even see short-term interest rates moving upwards. And that's very unfortunate. Until a few days ago, the general feeling was that by the end of this year, inflation would be coming down, and that would justify a slowdown or even a lowering of interest rates, the prime rate, for instance. Now that might be different. At the very best, we might see interest rates remaining at the current levels for a much longer period. Worst case could be an actual increase in short-term interest rates. Then the expectation is, and we see signs already, that as foreigners get more nervous about investing in this country, especially in bonds, they might withdraw their investments. And we could see, as we have seen already, the rand exchange rate moving in the wrong direction, in other words, depreciating. It's not bad news for everybody, by the way. Exporters might be quite happy about that. But for consumers, it will mean a weaker currency means a higher cost of imported goods, not least of which oil or petrol. Then the World Bank did a calculation earlier this year, and they asked the question, what would the impact be of junk bond status on this economy? Amongst other things, they pointed out that their calculations indicate that short-term interest rates would go up by 60 basis points. At least 1% of the GDP would be shaved off. Now, that doesn't sound too much, but actually that could mean the difference between a bit of growth and zero or even negative growth. They also calculated that everyone would be worse off by 1,000 rand. Well, if you multiply that by 55 million people, that's 55 billion rands worth of buying power that will be eroded over the next year or so, which is bad news, of course, for producers, bad news for employers. They also pointed out or calculated that up to 160,000 additional people will be plunged into poverty. So it's very difficult, naturally, to put a positive spin on this junk bond rating. We're not the only country in this situation. It's interesting that some of our fellow BRICS countries, such as Brazil and Russia, have had this rating for quite some time. India is pretty much at the same level that we are. It was very close to or moving closer towards junk bond rating. Excuse me. So it's not entirely unusual. It is, however, regrettable. Just over a week ago, the chances of junk bond rating were actually getting smaller and smaller. Overall, the macroeconomy was doing a bit better than a year ago. But we all know what's happened over the last week, and I think it's pretty clear that the ratings agencies are very concerned about the political noise, the political turmoil, the policy uncertainty that has evolved over the last few days, obviously culminating in the axing of the former finance minister and his deputy. I think that's really settled it for many of these ratings agencies. They feel that that is really compromising the ability, but also the willingness to follow suitable, appropriate economic policies, prudent policies, which would allow the repayment of debt in the years that lie ahead. When one looks at countries that have received this kind of rating and then restored their honor, as it were, it's taken on average about 7 years. Now, that's not to say it'll take us 7 years, it might take only 3 years, or it might take 10 years. But I think the message is you don't get an upgrading overnight. Of course, many people are of the opinion that if the current leadership of the country were to be ousted, that would restore lots of confidence. It probably would. But we must bear in mind that even without this junk bond rating, there are still very real fundamental constraints in the economy. So to assume that a new leadership would result in a miraculous turnaround of the economy would be pushing it a bit. Nonetheless, the markets would probably feel that a renewed or a renewal of leadership would go some way towards restoring the credibility of our credit rating. And of course, how that's going to unfold over the next few hours, days, weeks, no one really knows. I think what we're looking at over the next few days, weeks and months is ongoing market volatility. And the way the markets react is not always predictable. There's a certain school of thought that says that this downgrading and even the action of Minister Gordon was not totally unexpected. It could be that the markets have to some extent already factored that in their actions. It could be that the Rand might not collapse to the extent that some people are hoping, or not hoping, imagining. But we don't know. The markets are very vulnerable and the situation is very volatile. And in these times of volatility, you expect to see prices swinging upwards and downwards. So to summarize, a very unfortunate development. For some people, not entirely surprising, but it's very difficult to imagine any positive outcome of the junk bond rating, except possibly that now the decision has been made, we know where we stand. But other than that, it really is not a very nice prospect. And of course, once one of the ratings agencies has made the decision, chances are the others will follow suit.